Hello, my name is Bill McDonald of Charlotte County Libraries and History, and this is Author Talk. Our subject is writer Truman Capote. Many of you have probably seen the film Capote with Philip Seymour Hoffman, where Hoffman's performance won him an Academy Award portraying an author who is covering the murders in cold blood, which had to do with the Clutter murders in 1959 in Holcomb, Kansas. And other people might know Truman Capote from the 1970s, where he appeared on The Tonight Show, and he was a raconteur, told many stories. He was also on Dick Cavett. He was frequent in Studio 54. Capote had a very peculiar voice. It was something like this. He would say, "Well, my name is Truman, and I'm two things. I'm a writer, and I'm an observer." So he had a very quirky voice. And he also probably threw one of the most famous parties in the 20th century. It was called the Black and White Ball. It occurred in November of 1966 at the Plaza Hotel in New York City. It had 240 famous guests from various areas of literature, Hollywood, politics, and fashion. It included people like Andy Warhol, William F. Buckley, Henry Fonda, Frank Sinatra, Mia Farrow, and the writer Norman Mailer. And it was called the Black and White Ball because the men wore black mask and black tie or tuxedo, and the women wore a white dress and a white mask. And they had a midnight buffet of chicken hash and spaghetti, and they had a bottle of champagne each. So there were 240 bottles of champagne. So everybody was pretty inebriated, but it was an incredibly well-covered event through magazines and television, and it was probably one of the most famous social parties of the 20th century. Truman was born in New Orleans, but he moved to Monroeville, Alabama when he was 2. His mother took up with many different gentlemen, so Truman went to stay with relatives in Monroeville, Alabama. One of his neighbors, and I say neighbors directly next door to him, was Nell Harper Lee, who of course wrote To Kill a Mockingbird. In fact, one of the characters in To Kill a Mockingbird is named Dill, and that's based on Truman Capote. He grew up in Monroeville writing many things. After school, he would work on different short stories, and he eventually moved to New York City to go to high school there. He elected not to go to college, and he got a job as a copy boy for the New Yorker. There he had a run-in with a well-known poet, Robert Frost. Frost was giving a poetry reading, and Capote was told to go and show support from the magazine. Capote was undergoing a fever at that time, and he decided that he would sneak out of the poetry reading. Of course, Frost caught him trying to sneak out of the poetry reading and threw his book of poetry and hit Truman in the head. And not only that, but he also had Truman Capote fired. Capote, of course, kept up with his writing, and in his early 20s, he had a short story published for Mademoiselle magazine called Miriam. His first book, his first published novel, Other Voices, Other Rooms, became a bestseller when Truman was only 24. He continued writing. He also wrote the screenplay to Beat the Devil, which starred Humphrey Bogart, and he socialized with Humphrey Bogart and many of the Hollywood luminaries at that time. His most famous novel or novella was Breakfast at Tiffany's, which became a very successful movie starring Audrey Hepburn and George Peppard. The character in Breakfast at Tiffany's is Holly Golightly, which he based partly on himself and his mother and some of the other individuals he knew. She was a very, of course, person that couldn't commit to any individual or any geographic place, and her strong sense of individuality stops her from belonging to anything. And it was a very well-received book as well as a movie. After the Breakfast at Tiffany's novella, Truman decided that he wanted to change writing in a style that would combine nonfiction with the art of a novel. So it would have the creativity and the literary elements of a novel, but would be nonfiction. So he's looking for a story that he could combine the elements of novel writing with nonfiction. Of course, he found it in The Murder of the Clutter Family in 1959 in Holcomb, Kansas. And shortly thereafter, he and his childhood friend, who happened to be the author of To Kill a Mockingbird, Nell Harper Lee, arrived in Holcomb, Kansas to interview the various individuals in the town about the murder of the Clutter family. When authorities caught the two primary suspects, Dick Hickok and Perry Smith, Truman also extensively interviewed them and became very friendly with both of those individuals, especially Perry Smith. He told both Perry and Dick that he would try and help them appeal their case, and the case actually went to the Supreme Court, but they were later convicted and hung. Now, before they were hung, Truman said that he would spend the last couple of days with them and, of course, be there at their execution, which he wasn't because of various emotional reasons, the feeling that he had become close with the two individuals yet wanted to finish the book, and part of him wanted those two individuals to become executed so he would have an ending for the book. After the book was published, Truman, of course, threw the black and white ball and became very, very famous celebrity, would go on talk shows and tell various stories. Unfortunately, Truman did not write or complete a novel after that. When he was assigned to write the screenplay for The Great Gatsby, and he wasn't able to deliver anything. He told various individuals and authors and people who were covering him that he was working on a book called Answered Prayers, and that would detail his association with the Swans. The Swans, of course, were the most famous socialites in New York City, and they include people like Babe Paley, Gloria Guinness, Lee Radziwill, and Slim Keith. And like Babe Paley was William Paley's wife. William Paley, of course, was the head of CBS. So they were very wealthy, very attractive, very influential females in Manhattan and New York City. And he was working on a novel called Answered Prayers that would detail their social life, their connections with their famous and powerful husbands. Truman was eventually talked into releasing an excerpt from his unfinished novel, Answered Prayers, in Esquire magazine, and it was in the mid-70s, in which he profiled some of the various swans. Of course, didn't use their real names, but the names were close enough that people who knew the swans knew who Truman was talking to. The result of that Esquire magazine article, which was called Le Cote Basque 1965, caused the swans that Truman was very friendly with to disown him, to socially treat him as a pariah. And they were very upset at him, and they also caused Truman's celebrity to suffer quite a bit. As a result, Truman suffered psychologically. He started drinking a lot more and abusing prescription drugs. And in 1984, Truman died at the wife of Joanna Carson's house at the age of 59 in 1984. So what is Truman remembered for. Of course, we've seen the movie Capote with Philip Seymour Hoffman, and there was another movie on Capote with Toby Jones. And we remember his almost Kardashian-like celebrity that he had in the 70s. He was seen at Studio 54. But in terms of his writing, he was one of the first that really made nonfiction read like a novel. So if you read a piece of nonfiction work and it reads like a novel, the characters are rich, the story seems to unfold much like a novel would. You have Truman Capote to thank for that. He was really the person that started that trend of literary nonfiction. He also, in a lot of ways, can be considered the father of true crime. He covered the Clutter murders in cold blood, and so we can think of him as a wonderful and amusing personality, but also an author that changed and fused fiction and nonfiction, made nonfiction read more like a novel, and also being the father of true crime. Thank you.